everyone, and good whatever wonderful moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones. Happy pre Friday or happy very early Friday if we have anyone from the future listening in today. My name is Minola Jacques, and I am so happy to host this next conversation. We have Jessa backstage, our technical whisperer, and I believe that the only thing that is getting better than the intro music are the conversations. So let's start bringing our wonderful speakers on the screen. We have an amazing lineup today, and I am very convinced that it will feel like a very short hour. So I will just take a few seconds and welcome everybody in the audience, either now or as you enjoy the recording. Please do drop us a note. Let us know where you connect from. It's always so good to see where Hacking HR is inspiring people. And also, please do consider the chat as your conversation space. And do consider that all the questions in our panel are also open to you. Build your own conversations, build your own connections, and I will try to keep one lens on the chat and bring highlights into our panel. So let's make this blabathon short. What I will do, I will now read the title of the panel. Thank you, Enrique. Culture as a competitive advantage, leveraging organizational culture to drive business outcomes and outperform the competition. So this is our thinking and inspiration homework for now. You are all friends of Hacking HR panel veterans, so you know the drill by now. What I will do, I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen. That means, Rusty, that you will go first, otherwise no pressure. And the first ask is very simple. Just shortly introduce yourselves. And without dropping any spoilers for our topic, just give us a very dense definition of what culture means to you. So, Rusty, welcome. So good to see you.
Hey, Manola, it's great to be here again. Thanks for the easy entry. What culture is just in a very short, dense definition. What is culture? What does it mean to you? So my name is Rusty Gaylord. I am an executive coach, and I really help leaders be more bold. So I work with independent thinkers, senior leaders to step out of the box and really take action to help move the business forward. Culture, for me, really, culture is, I think it's often people get confused about this aspirational idea of what culture should be or what they want it to be from what culture actually is. And culture really is a reflection of, or a description, if you will, of how people interact on a day-to-day basis inside the company. So I think that that's a really important aspect because it's in the behaviors and the actions people take.
Thank you so very much. Anu, good to see you.
Hi, thank you. My name is Anu Mandapati, and I am the Global Head of Culture and Inclusion at Magic Leap. And Rusty, you pretty much said what I wanted to say, so I'm going to add this. Culture, to me, culture pretty much either makes or breaks an organization. It is about how we show up, how we interact, how we approach problems. So I'll stop there before we get into even more, but I'm excited to be here.
Wonderful. Shayna, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me. I'm Shayna Sweeney. I realized I didn't put my last name in the screen, but I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Sugar CRM. We're a SaaS-based software company, and I feel like Rusty and Anu kind of encompassed it in terms of what culture is. The only thing I will add to it is it's also how we treat each other when no one else is in the room, and just again echoing, it's how we get things done, how we interact, how we work together, and what sort of those norms are in everyday work life.
Thank you, Nicole. Welcome on our screen. So good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks for having me today. I'm Nicole Riley. I'm a Chief People Officer and the CEO of Elevate Executive Consulting. I think Denise and I have the hardest task here of trying to add something here, but I would say, in addition to what the other panelists have said, I would say it's really about how people feel. right? It's how they feel in their interactions with leadership, colleagues, and what those behaviors are that are accepted within an organization. And so not a standalone definition, but definitely an add-on to the others.
Thank you. And Nicole, you are so right. It's usually from the second round onwards that going last is such a hot seat. So Denise, my heart goes out to you. Good to see you.
Good to see you, and nice to be here with all of you today. Thank you for having me. And I would say that culture is really, truly everything that all of the people who've gone before me have described. For me, the way that people work together and the voice that is the loudest voice that speaks without being spoken is culture. So it is exactly what everyone described: what you feel, what you see when no one is really watching, and truly the way that people accept and expect certain behaviors and or reject behaviors that don't fit into the culture. And it really has to be led from the top of the organization and fused all the way through the business strategy. The one thing it's not is it's not an HR initiative. And I'm Denise Beers-Kipper. I'm the founder and CEO of DBK Coaching and Consulting. I'm a reformed C-suite HR leader, and I moved from my side gig into a full-time endeavor. I work with individuals from the C-suite all the way through the spectrum of leadership in an organization, as well as one-on-one, to help people navigate chaos in their careers and in everyday working settings and situations, both on teams and individual basis. It's nice to be here.
It's wonderful. You all ooze such passion for this topic. And it was so evident, judging by the proportion of your introduction in comparison to what culture means to you. And you dropped so many awesome conversation, Candy. So I now come collect. Before we talk about culture used as a competitive advantage, I am really curious, what exactly are the prerequisites for a culture to be even considered as part of the conversation about competitive advantage? People say, oh, we have a good culture. Or we say, we have the exact culture to set us apart. Now, what do they mean? What could they possibly mean? And let's do this like this. Let's go diagonally now. So, Shana, I will invite you to be the pioneer for this round of conversation. And then the rest of you, you know the drill. It's LinkedIn Live unmuting competition officially open. Just build your own conversation. So, Shana, prerequisites for culture to be even considered as a competitive advantage.
Sure. Some of the things that I think about from my perspective in terms of prerequisites for culture as a competitive advantage is ensuring that you have alignment with organizational goals. You don't want to have values and a mission and vision that aren't closely tied together. Otherwise, that can cause some, the opposite of what you want. I think you need to have clear, transparent, and frequent communication. You need to have a mechanism with which culture is communicated, reinforced, celebrated, and ensuring that you have that. Strong leadership, because as you mentioned, Manola, it's not an HR initiative, and you need your leaders all around the organization to walk the talk and to demonstrate the culture, and they're a piece of what makes the culture itself. Employee participation, because we all are a piece of what makes our cultures. And so you kind of need all of those things in the background. That's what I would start with. And I'm sure the rest of the panelists will have fantastic things to add on to it.
Anu, I saw you unmuted. Yes, please.
Yes. When I think about culture, sometimes it's referred to as every employee is a culture carrier. I actually believe that we're culture co-creators instead. So what was just said right now, it's about all of us doing this together. So it's not just the CEO, it's not just the executive team, it's all of us coming together and having that shared responsibility. So we know that what our actions are going to impact that greater culture. So I think everyone in the company knowing that they play a role in this is really important to make sure people feel it, not just read it somewhere. They're actually experiencing it. I think that's what actually helps us get to having that conversation about the competitive advantage.
Mm.
I'm going to
Nicole.
jump in. And, I love what you just said around being co-creators, because I truly do believe that's where we see the magic really come together for culture. And when it's seen as a singular individual or a small group of people, really just being the owners of culture, it's very hard for it to actually take hold. And you end up with subcultures a lot of times, which is very, very counter to what we try to create when we create a competitive culture for business culture for competitive advantage. I would say that in my experience, the thing that's really very, very critical around this is to have accountability and inclusion as a part of your foundational cultural expectations, right? The way that people are able to be themselves and feel safe and truly be who they are every day, lean into with their values, the values of the organization. And when there's that alignment in values, Shauna, you mentioned that, I would say 100% it's really a game changer.
Yeah, if I could go ahead and add, there's a couple of things that pop to mind for me. Obviously, this co-creation carrier of the culture, I think of it a lot as being a steward of the culture, because I think we all have not only a role in the creation of it, but a role in the maintenance and continuation of it. And I'm sure we've all been at organizations where things felt really good for a while, and then all of a sudden they didn't anymore, and you're like, what happened, right? And sometimes it's because you lose some of the key players, or people just let that go. And so I think being a steward of that is important. But what that really ties back to for me, is around courage. And I think courage has to be a precursor of being able to make culture a competitive advantage, because we're talking about behaviors. We're talking about behaviors that are accepted or not, and having the courage of leadership to make sure that those unaccepted behaviors are not accepted anyway because of somebody's performance or because of their name or whatever it is, and being stewards of the culture where everyone feels comfortable with, take this word lightly, I don't mean it in the way it's going to sound, but sort of policing that we're all maintaining those behaviors and living within the culture and values that are created with an organization. And with that, I think the other thing is that it has to be embedded in everything, right? Shauna mentioned communications, different thing, every program, every talent initiative, everything that goes on within the organization, including how you market to your customer base, it has to be embedded in that. And if it's not, then you're going to start to find, as Denise said, some of those subcultures, or you're going to have an external culture that you market, and internally everyone's going to say that doesn't match. And so to me, those are the two things that really stand out: courage and making sure it's embedded in everything.
I want to, I guess I have I think all of these are super insightful and interesting points, but, to me, it's like, well, I'm trying to pick apart, what is it that makes culture a competitive advantage for a company, right? Because all of these things are true, right? Like any company has a culture, and all of these are important aspects. So what is it that sets culture apart as a competitive advantage? And so I was just thinking back to some of the things you guys said. And I like, one of the things Shanna opened with was, does the culture align with the vision of the company, the purpose of the company, the business model? And I think that's a super important one. And then the other one, which kind of comes from everything that you guys were saying, which in my mind, I kind of summarize as, does it allow people to bring their best self to work and do their best work? Fundamentally, business is people. It's the people that are sitting in the desks, whether that's at home or in the office, doing the work. And if they're not able to bring their best, which requires courage and requires, some of this, single culture versus subcultures, all of that, they're all elements, but enabling people to really bring their best. That's the thing that stands out for me.
Thank you all. And I love how at some point, just as we started to talk about competitive advantage, our furry people present on the call started their own competitive dialogue. So it's always good to hear live on these panels. I would like to take this a little bit deeper. For anyone who listens and is like, oh, culture as competitive advantage, yes, there's something in this. Where should they start? How can they say, I will take all the inspiration from today and I will start something, maybe not tomorrow, it's Friday, but Monday, 9 a.m. What are the conversations that they can trigger? What are the train of thoughts that we can help them with? And Anu, please.
Sure. When you were just asking that question, I thought about what's actually in my direct control. And so changing or shifting the organizational culture, that's a monumental task. So what's in my control? It's to actually impact the team that I'm on. So I think it's having a candid conversation. How are we feeling? How would we describe the culture on this team? What is it that we actually want that to look like? What is it that, are we in alignment with what we want, or is there something different that we want to create? Then what are those steps that we can take to actually co-create that culture? Because sometimes people think about culture as, again, some gigantic organizational thing. It's actually in the everyday practices of how we show up with one another. So it's at the individual level, the interpersonal level, the team level, and the organizational level.
Let's see who has the quickest finger. It's a dexterity
I'll just
competition.
tag on to that. I like what Anu was saying, and to me, it comes down to, okay, and I love the personal empowerment piece, right? Like, I think it's so easy to sit back and say, the culture here stinks, right? But then not do anything about it. And so I really like that personal piece of, look, it's co-created by everybody, and you are impacting the culture of the people you work with and the people you interact with day to day. And so to me, I think the question becomes, what are you going to do about it? Right? I think there's always an opportunity to strengthen culture, to deepen it, to make it richer. And if there's an element that you think that needs to change, it's going to draw on courage. It's going to draw on your daily actions. And so to me, the question, for Monday morning is to sit there and say, if I wanted to enhance our culture in some way, what is the action that I can take in terms of the way I'm interacting with people, the way I'm spending my time, how I'm making decisions, whether I'm confronting or not confronting conflicts, all of these kinds of things. What are the actions that I can take to make a difference?
Denise, I saw you unmuted a little bit earlier.
So I really love that you asked the question relative to some action-oriented things that we can put in place, because ultimately cultivating a culture is a consistent action, and it's very much what y'all are saying, in my view, of personal ownership as well as engagement and influence to a wider group. I want to take it up a level and think about it from a strategic view for a moment, and say, on Monday, when I walk in, the first thing I want to understand is really where we are today. We have to be willing to, as leaders, hear what we might not want to hear, and take the good with the not so great or even bad. And how do we do that? Well, we ask. And we ask not to tell, but we ask to listen, right? To lean into what are those things that we do need to take action on. But I will also put a caveat in there. Don't ask and listen if you're not willing to take action. Don't even go there, because that takes your culture backwards instead of forwards. So ask, listen, and get ready to take action. And you can't take action on, if you have a survey and you have 10 things that need to be changed, you're not going to change all 10 overnight, right? This is a long run. And so what are the most important things? Pick one. What's the one most important thing that we can make a difference in? For me, a lot of times it's looking at the turnover and understanding what's driving the turnover in an organization and kind of getting to the root of that, because a lot of other things can be solved. But what's that one most important thing? Take action on it, and then really set the stage in an agreement with all of the leadership of the organization, because this is really a leadership part. Leadership has to agree that we want to make a shift, that we're willing to do some of this harder work, that we're going to let go of the way we've always worked together in some way, perhaps, so we can move it ahead based on what we heard and taking action. And then we just keep going, and we keep listening, and we keep asking, and we take the second thing, and we just repeat that as it continues to grow and more.
So I'm going to say, I wish my finger would have been faster, because that's exactly what I was going to say, Denise, is you have to evaluate where you are. You know, it's the start of any big effort. Everybody has a culture, right? Like, you're not starting from zero. There's something there. So how do you identify what it is, what behaviors are allowed, the good, bad, and the ugly, right? And really, you know, to get it down to sort of a project level, not to go too deep, but like, you've got to do your gap analysis. You have to know where you are and at least an idea of where you want it to be. And once you get through that, and it goes back to the comment before about co-creating, right? When you're ready to start rolling, right? When you're ready to look at it and say, yep, this is where we are, and we don't like all of it, and some of it we want to change. How do you go about that? And how do you tie it back to the mission, the vision, whatever it is that you're tying it to in your organization, to say, okay, here's our gap and here's how we're going to tackle it. And then communicate.
I'll also add in from just an incredibly tactical, practical standpoint. One of the things we did to get a pulse on where our culture was at was we formed some focus groups. We got a cross section of employees representing all levels, all departments, all countries. And we sat down in a room and we just asked people. We had just like 4 questions. It wasn't in depth or anything, but it was, you know, how would you describe the culture here? And we wrote down everything everyone said. We asked people, what are the moments that mattered to you that kept you here? What are those things that make you feel positive about? We wrote those down. And then we asked people, like, if you could change one thing, what would you change? And from that, we got very consistent adjectives describing our culture, which was helpful. They matched what we thought, because sometimes what you might think at an executive level might not be how people are experiencing the culture on a day-to-day basis. So it's good to check in on that. And then we were able to take some of the feedback on how people described our culture and update and turn it into our employee value proposition by just having, I think we had like 4 1-hour meetings. We were able to pretty quickly get an idea of what our culture is. And anyone can do that at any level. You can just talk to people and they'll tell you. And that can give you a starting point, in addition to doing a survey or other more in-depth analysis as well.
I think it's also very telling, if you undertake an effort like that, whether or not people want to participate. That'll be clue number 1, right?
I see that there's increased energy in the chat around the role of leaders, and you know, culture comes from the top to bottom. We talked about co-creation. So the next question comes with a spin for our panel. It's not a panel about culture, but it's a panel about culture as competitive advantage. So who owns the work related to linking culture to the business strategy and embedding it in the unique value proposition? And Denise, I do remember that you made a point quite forcefully during the introduction that it's culture work, it's not an HR work. So you kind of brought it up on yourself. Who owns linking culture to the value proposition of an organization?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about this particular element of embedding and driving culture to be a competitive advantage. I think everybody on the panel has inferred and or said it quite directly, that it really is a co-created, everyone has to be the players, right? But who's quarterbacking? The quarterbacks, because it's college football season and I'm that person, are really the people who are going to own and drive it. And it really probably depends a little bit upon your organization and the way that your organization works. But at the very top, it has to be owned and loved by the CEO and the C-suite. And when I say owned and loved, I mean it is a part of their heart, and they understand that everybody on your leadership team has an agreement and has held hands and said that if we do this, we know we are going to have better share price, lower turnover, attract and retain top talent, all of the markers that are really critical elements of having culture as a competitive advantage. And when people see those metrics start to shift, other leaders start to lean in because they really enjoy seeing those, winning metrics and pulling more either talent or business from a competitor. And it's a really nice thing to be able to say, right? So the leaders love to be able to share these kind of things with each other and with their peer group. But what really is magical is when that next tier of leaders and that next tier of leaders, and then the people who are all a part of the team start to have the same speak. And so ultimately, everyone owns it in their own way of co-creating, but it has to be initially owned at the very top. Just my view.
So I'm a fan of analogies. So I look at this as this is the baby, right? The brand new infant just born. The leadership team, right? That's their baby, right? But as we all know, anybody who is a parent, it totally takes a village, right? And so the village sits within the organization, and part of that is within HR. And so do we own it A to Z? Absolutely not. But we play a very critical role in embedding culture in various programs, things that we roll out into the organization. So if you take it down to the tactical, right, take it down to the things that you can really do. Think about things of onboarding, right? How are you making sure that individuals understand the expectations of how the culture within the organization is? How do you look at that through, how do you get managers to account for that in their interview and selection process, right? When you're putting together L&D programs, how is culture talked about, right? How is it embedded in those various things? When we sit down to do a talent review, how are we talking about not only the what, but the how within an organization? And how do you make that how carry weight, right? All of these things that we actually own, right? We own the program or product of that, so to speak. It all goes back to the leaders, the people managers, and the individuals living within that culture and being the stewards of it. But we're part of the village, so to speak. We might even be the nanny, but we're part of that village for the baby that's been born.
I love that, Natalie. We're the Sherpas. We're the guides. We just keep you in check.
So I was just gonna. So I agree with both of the points from Denise and Natalie. Denise and Nicole. Sorry. The thing that I think is really interesting that, it can be really well cultural aspects and desired cultural state can be really well embedded in all of the HR practices. But if it's not what's practiced day to day in the way the company operates, you're going to have this big conflict and it's not going to work. And that's why I think what Denise was saying earlier about, this has to come from the C-suite, right? And probably the CEO has to be the one driving it. And I think there's a really important role here for somebody, whether that's the head of HR or somebody else, the head of people, to be holding the CEO accountable and the C-suite accountable for this. And this gets back to, I think it was Nicole who talked about courage. That, someone's got to be going up and saying, hey, you've identified this cultural attribute. Let's just say dealing directly with conflict. You've identified that as something that's important, and you're not doing it, or here's an opportunity to do it where you need to lean in it. So everybody needs that kind of support. And I would say, especially the person who's the champion of this, because we all have blind spots.
Absolutely. So let's see, plus one to everything that everyone has said. And I think back to many years ago, I worked for an organization called Quicken Loans, which I know that names have changed at this point. And to this day, it's an organization that stands out to me in so many ways because the cultural values are called isms. And as part of new hire orientation, you had the chairman as well as the CEO both show up and talk about how important it is of how we show up, how we live, how we, how we show up with each other, how we approach situations. And the fact that they're coming to every new hire orientation live, right? Nothing's recorded, having those conversations, people very quickly understood what am I walking into as far as a company? How am I going to feel? How do I want to show up? And as far as the competitive advantage part, I mean, consistently, I cannot even tell you the number of JD Power Awards that they've won, but at least 9 of them have been #1 in client satisfaction. So it really speaks to who owns it, everybody, but it's also you've got to have the leaders driving it and continuously. We talked early about the co-creation, but what does that maintenance look like? So how is this continuing to, be talked about at the team level, 3 months out, 6 months out, a year out after people have joined? So it's a constant conversation, and we can all hold each other accountable to how we want to be with one another.
And just to note, what a great indicator of competitive advantage, right? Translates directly into external recognition.
Absolutely. And what a powerful example, not only for the individuals that are joining the organization, but if every leader understands that this is what the chairman and CEO blocked their time to do, right? Incredibly busy, schedules. And that's what they block their time to do every time. It just shows you the importance, tenfold to the rest of the organization. That's phenomenal.
Mm-hmm.
I've been observing some of this cultural change going on at CSX Railway. They have a new CEO, Joe Henricks, who started in the last year, and he's spending a part of almost every week. He's going out to one of the rail yards and talking to the people who work there. Right, like most companies with tens of thousands of employees, you don't hear about the CEO working with the frontline employees, and it's just another example of what Nicole was saying. It's like, hey, if it's important enough to spend your time doing this, then it clearly is something important that people are going to take note of that. But I just want to kind of like turn that perspective around a little bit, because, you think about typically a CEO is like, well, their time is really valuable. And, how are they going to carve out time to go to a new employee orientation or to go to visit frontline employees? And yet on the other hand, when you think about the CEO is one person, and if they can empower thousands or tens of thousands of people to rise up or to raise a level of their performance, what better way could they be spending their time?
Shayna, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, just on that topic, we've set up a whole portion of our onboarding where every single member of our executive team meets with every single new hire on a regular basis to help reinforce the culture, reinforce like, hey, here's how you work with our team. And we found that to be a really powerful way of getting people up to speed quickly. That's been very effective. But I also wanted to say on sort of like who creates the strategy or the initial culture stuff. We went through a process where we had a culture, we kind of knew where it was, but we hadn't really defined it. It wasn't in writing. It was just how people got things done. And our executive team, we went through a process where we decided to create essentially a culture on a page, where we had our mission, our vision, and our values, and really thinking through the values. And so we created that because I think, as Nicole said, it was our baby. And we wanted our baby to grow up right and to be loved by everybody. But then once we created it, we spent some time socializing it and getting feedback from some of the more vocal people at our company. Also some people who are not as vocal, but a lot of times what we found is really helpful is when you can find sort of who your biggest critics are and get their input in the process, because they'll tell you a little bit more directly and bluntly where you might be failing in either like your wording or like, hey, you said this, but really what does this mean? And so we were able to come up with this nice, colorful document that we could share with everyone, that was clearly articulated, and where people had co-created it with us and poked holes in it. And then we had enough buy-in across the organization that as we rolled it out, people in different parts of the organization were like, they had some pride with, I had something to do with that. And so I'm bought into this. And we found that to be a really effective way of having, leadership drive, but building that co-creation into the process itself.
Nina, I love that. And I love the way that you articulated the very specific steps that you took to get there from kind of the beginning to where you are today. It really is also something that a lot of times we can learn from people who are doing it really well, right? And so in my experience, one of the things that I personally had the opportunity to do and have encouraged my teams to do along the way when I was in corporate was actually learning from people who had amazing cultures like Rocket and or Quicken, because I too am familiar with them anew, but many others, right? Find a few organizations that really emulate what the culture looks like to you that you are hoping to lean into, and reach out to the people leading that organization from an HR perspective or other leaders that you can connect with to learn from them. You'll be really surprised in most, if not all, of the organizations that I've reached out and connected to in that regard. Very interested in sharing and being open, because while it is a competitive advantage, there's plenty of the pie to go around for all of us. And in my experience, most HR leaders in particular will lean in and share a lot of insight and information. And the other thing relative to that was really powerful is in a couple of places, I connected my CEO with the CEO of the organization that had that amazing culture that we were leaning in toward. And the two of them went to lunch and got to know each other, and or even just connected over a conversation. And then there was this different kind of like, oh, that's really cool, and interest in buy-in.
Mm. It is so wonderful to listen to you, and I always say that one irrefutable marker of a great conversation is when facilitation is rendered almost irrelevant. So thank you so very much. We are quite a few minutes into the second half of our conversation, so I will take a few seconds and just say welcome to those who joined a little bit later. For you and also for those of you who need to jump off before we wrap this awesome conversation up, don't worry, you will get the recording on hackinghrlab.io. And it's not something that I usually do. I think I do it for the first time today. So there you go, word premiere. I would like to give the panelists heads up on the fact that I will come and ask you to share even more stories and more examples of how culture was used as a competitive advantage. So keep that in the back of your head. I will come collect on that one. Now, if I remember correctly, Rusty, you do have a passion for data and metrics. I do remember you getting quite passionate about this in past conversations. So here's your opportunity to be the pioneer in a round of answers. Are there any ways, any metrics, any kind of data that we can use to really track the effectiveness of culture as a competitive advantage?
I think it's a great question. I'll be honest, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how you measure the effectiveness of culture. And so I'm going to defer to my other panelists here, who I'm sure have much more experience and more thought put into that. But I really actually like the story that Anu shared earlier, which is, the culture, there was investment in the culture and the result was external recognition. And I think ultimately culture is, as we're talking about it as a competitive advantage, the whole purpose of that is to help your company be more successful. And I think ultimately, if you're talking about your company's success, that is external recognition, rewards, and so on. But it's also obviously revenue growth. It's about profitability. And I think Denise at some point mentioned turnover and retention, employee retention. And that's obviously a critical metric for any company because it costs a lot of money to bring in new people. So from my standpoint, obviously it can be it can be difficult to draw a hard line between culture and all of these kind of business performance metrics. And yet we all know that the connection is there. And so I think it's about measuring those external factors, that the external performance, measuring culture to the, and again, that's where I'm going to defer to others to share more about that piece, and then making the connection between the two.
I'll add a little bit on the metrics piece. I agree with Rusty in that there's not necessarily, like, there's no one culture metric, right? I think a lot of organizations try to do that through employee surveys or voice of the employer, whatever it is. And it's like, okay, it's employee NPS, not necessarily, right? It's like all these other things. And so if you have a robust analytics and metrics sort of standard at your organization, there's going to be a number of things that roll up to that, right? When you look at attrition, you can go so deep in attrition. And I think that is a big culture measurement, right? Not just attrition in general, attrition of your top performers, attrition of the failed hires, right? That leave within the first year. Look at it, break it down in different ways. Is it all out of one group? And we're all in HR, right? We all know how to do this. I'm not saying anything that's that we're not probably already doing. But then you get into measurements that you can look at through survey system and through, focus groups or whatever it may be, which you start to look at. To me, the biggest measurement and that you need to get down to is level of trust, right? Do you trust leadership? Do you trust your manager? Do you trust your colleagues and your teammates? Because if your trust is high, then you're working on a really nice culture. If your trust is low in an organization, you're in a bad spot, right? That's really the driver of all of these things is trust. So regardless of how you measure it, right? And there's different ways to gain that. A measurement on trust is about as close as you can get, in my mind, to an actual cultural measurement that's singular. But we all know there's no one singular metric for anything. But that's my thought on it.
In addition to some of the items people mentioned, like turnover, employee survey, employee NPS, some of the other stuff that we look at, because again, I also agree that there's not like one magic metric that links to it. We'll look at sort of like key performance indicators or OKR and like are people getting those things done? We look at revenue per employee and compare ourselves to other organizations. Because that is a mildly decent metric sometimes for telling stuff. Because I'm in tech, we care a lot about innovation. And so sometimes we'll look at the number of patents that are being created to see if that's indicative of us being innovative. We look at customer satisfaction and loyalty to see if the NPS score, which is the external facing net promoter score, if that's high and what the customer feedback is. Because you want your culture to feed down through all parts of your organization, and at least we believe that our culture should be represented in how we interact with our customers. Your market position and reputation, sort of like, do people know who you are? Are you a known name? Are you not a known name? Obviously, profit margins, your revenue growth. And then we also look at the number of ethics violations that people report to see, like, are people behaving in a good, positive way or not? And then, sort of the anecdotes and stories that we hear from people as well. So we kind of try to combine all of those things as a measure of seeing, like, is our culture giving us a competitive advantage? Is it not? Is it hindering us? But especially in interactions with customers in the line of business we're in, that's one of the easiest places for us to see if our culture's providing a competitive advantage or not.
So I want to say, Nicole, thank you for saying trust, because it is, I think we all agree, the most foundational element. If you don't have trust, there has to be dramatic change to get to that place before you can talk about culture. And recognizing and accepting that can be very hard sometimes, but it's also a very critical element. Shana, thank you for calling out the metrics and the specifics relative to the way that you all do it. I think especially being in tech, right? There are a lot of different angles to look at it, and very much appreciate that, because things that people don't always think about, right? Additionally, I would say, once you have trust, you're going to see people leaning in. And one of the things I talk about when I describe this to leaders and to people when I'm talking about a cultural shift is one of the most powerful things that you start to watch when the culture is truly embedded and it's aligned with your business strategy, right? There's a red thread through all of the things you speak about, the way you speak about them. Your values and mission are intimately tied to the way that people are brought into the organization and people are attracted to the organization. And when you step back and see that all really starting to hum, what happens in highly engaged organizations is that the team members become much more owners of the culture, which creates what I describe as a team member push versus a leader pull. So in less engaged organizations, you see leaders pulling people, right? Like, you got to come with me. Come on, we have these things to do. Come with us and join the team. Over time, when everybody truly is aligned with the culture and in some way has a heart attached to the culture of the organization, they take great pride in it. And they take great pride in knowing that it's driving share price. It's driving more attraction of talent to the organization, right? And it becomes almost like kind of a self-managed thing where the people in the organization then, as a team, will call out, "Hey, that's exactly it! Yay!" or "You're out of bounds. Come back with me." And also come to leaders with ideas, to your point, Sheena, around innovation. And so that is kind of a magic indicator for me when I see and we feel leaders no longer pulling hard, but team members pushing forward.
I appreciate you bringing that up, Denise, and I agree with everything that's been shared. And what's coming to me is when we look at metrics, a lot of people look at it at the organizational level. And just as a reminder, so what does that look like with specific business areas? What does that look like for specific teams? And, if sometimes team culture is, when you look at the scores, sometimes they're much higher than the organizational cultural scores. So it's really taking a look at each level and then figuring out, what are some teams doing really, really well? What are some areas for opportunity? And so I think just to point that out when we're slicing and dicing the data, just to make sure that we're looking at it from many angles.
Here's a challenge to all of you. Let's say people get inspired and through a variety of pieces of work, whether culture work or competitive advantage work or business strategy work, they come to realize that the culture is not necessarily something that they would like very close, to being their competitive advantage. And, speaking to your analogy, Nicole, you can't just take the baby back and ask for a refund. So how can we balance nature and nurture when we are faced with a culture that needs quite a lot of caring and compassionate village around it? So Nicole, please, you brought this analogy, you take care of it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, you cannot get a refund on a baby. I've tried. It does not work. They hold very little. No, they're very costly though. You make a good point. And to me, and I always joke that I'm like the HR person with the heart 10 times too small, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. To me, I think the biggest and best way that you can start to affect a culture change from something that maybe has some warts on it that you're not wanting to, that you need to enhance, is a leadership change, quite frankly. And that's the way I've seen it work, because you can want to change everything in the world, but if your leaders are not willing to stand behind those cultural values and make the difficult decisions and have that management courage to do the things that they need to do, and that may be, letting some folks go, that may be making different decisions that have done in the past. And we all know these leadership teams get a little cemented at times in the way they're thinking and decision making that they take. and you have to mix that up. You know, if I ever saw a leadership team that had everybody with like 10 years in role, I would have a panic attack, right? Because I don't think, you know, you're just going to get a lot of the same. And so I do think that that's probably the number one thing you have to look at. If you have a business line, an organization as a whole, where, you know, there really needs to be some enhancement to the culture in order to, you know, increase revenue, increase customer experience, all these various things, a leadership turn is probably the number one thing you have to look at.
Thank you. Let's see who follows in these shoes. Okay, in the interest of time, I will invite Anu.
When Nicole was speaking, what came to my mind is this is a journey, it's not a destination. And so this is, you know, this is the ever long journey. It's not going to stop. And so looking at it that way, I think it's also really important to think about what's actually attainable. So what's that shift? What is that going to look like in 3 months or 6 months or a year? We can't change everything right away. And I go with the philosophy of, you know, no matter what we do as HR leaders, you know, or leaders in general, 1/3 is going to, you know, really be happy and love it. 1/3's not going to, and then the other third's just doesn't really care, right? So I think a big part of this is sustainability. What can we actually change, and how do we take care of our well-being while we're doing it as well? So as HR practitioners, there's so much on our plate. This is so pivotal and important. But to me, what comes up is, you know, I'm in it for the long haul. So what am I going to do for the next 3 months, for the next 6 months, for the next year? And where the culture will be in 3 years might look very different, but I'm not going to be able to do all that on my own. So it's making sure that we're getting that buy-in and we're slowly working on this together.
I'll
Please.
add in, as an HR leader, you also need to have the courage to have these tough conversations with your peers who may not be, you know, live in the values, live in the culture. And you need to make sure that you have enough influence with them and enough coaching skills to get them to really hear you, and for you to be able to encourage them to, you know, take different actions than they're taking. Otherwise, like Nicole said, sometimes a change is in order for sure. But knowing how to influence leaders at different levels and help them recognize their blind spots is often really key, because sometimes as leaders, you know, if we have been doing the same thing for a long time, we may be less likely to see those blind spots. And it takes someone sometimes calling it out, saying, this really isn't working, and this is what problem is being caused by this, and we're not living this, and we need to work on this together to find a solution. I think that's also an important piece where you need individual courage. And then sometimes if the culture's bad, sometimes you personally have to decide if it's time to hit the eject button and leave. Sometimes our personal values conflict with how the culture is evolving and turning out. And so there's also an individual piece of the equation of, is this worth my time to continue doing this? And obviously, you know, depending on the environment, that's easier said than done. But that sometimes is a piece of the equation as well.
I want to add one more thought. Years back, the way culture was talked about was this is a touchy-feely, softer side of things because it's not hard metrics. And just even looking at this evolution of previously we would see HR teams, we've transitioned to people, and then people and culture, even when you're looking at titles of people's roles. So I think culture is being seen more as a competitive advantage. And so now it's turning into not that soft thing that, you know, maybe we focus on or maybe we don't, but now we know that it's an imperative. And so in that coaching that you were just talking about, it's tying that in, like, here's the why. This is why we're having this conversation. Here's why it's so important. Here's the impact that it's having on your team, on your peers, et cetera. So really making sure they're understanding, you know, what's the wrapper, you know, of when you're actually sharing that message. So I think clarifying that helps people understand the importance, and hopefully they will actually take some actions towards that.
Rusty.
I'm kind of thinking about this. When you have a culture that's not where it needs to be, clearly you need someone to drive a change. And I think I'm fully on board with what Nicole had to say. Is if there's people who are obstacles to that, they should be replaced. But I also think what Shanna said is a great point, which is you may have people who aren't obstacles, but they're not seeing what it is that they're doing that's contributing. And so, that is one of the challenges of the person who's driving this effort, is to say who has it in them, who has the interest and the desire and the capability to make a change with appropriate support, and who doesn't. But I do think that at least at the beginning of an effort like that, it communicates a very strong message if there is some change in the leadership, because that clearly is an indication that something is changing here.
Mm. And Denise.
Y'all have said this so very well. I love the point you make relative, Rusty, to tying to Nicole's comment about being willing to make this tough decision, right? And it really being an indicator to the overall organization that we mean it, right? We're actually serious about this. I think, one of the things I've seen in that kind of a shift is, as Manola would speak to, being the expert on change, that any change, and especially change in leadership, can be incredibly daunting, even if the entire organization at their core knows that it was the right thing to do. And so, to your point, Rusty, and I think all of us would probably lean into this, in that the way that it's done and the way that it's communicated and the care that is taken for the next steps is incredibly critical, to really be crystal clear, right? Like, you have to be crystal clear on, this is what's in and what's out. Behaviors look like this. Behaviors don't look like this. All the leaders are on the bus and willing to have those tough conversations. And a lot of times it comes, Shauna, to coaching, where maybe leaders got to where they are without actually having to do any tough coaching. And then when you get in these moments, they have to have hard conversations and are not necessarily equipped with the right tools. So really giving people the ability to be equipped for those conversations, and being very consistent around, that might have fit before, it doesn't fit now. Come with us. This is what it looks like. It feels uncomfortable for sure. But so did the culture that was created before this shift. And so let us, it's a little bit of, kind of inspirational in some ways.
So I'm going to say something terribly painful. We are 3 minutes away from saying goodbye, and I am not ready to give up on the promise to go through some anecdotes on how culture can be used as competitive advantage. But let's reframe it. Instead of sharing stories and anecdotes, let's share use cases and make them not punchline style, but generous punchline style. So very value dense and very short. And in the interest of time, what I will do, I will just randomly ask you to share your generous punchline, your use case on culture as competitive advantage. And Shayna, I saw you smiling, so please, you go first.
I will very quickly use our own culture. We focus on flexibility and empowerment. And the way that looks is we allow people to work wherever they feel they can do their best work. They can set their hours. And we have a culture of yes, if, and just fix it, where you see a problem, you fix a problem, and you come up with creative solutions. And that gives people the empowerment within the organization to make changes, get things done, make improvements. And we've really seen that from a recruiting standpoint, from our customer NPS scores to all of the brand recognition and awards we've been winning. We've definitely seen that play through, making it a competitive advantage for us.
Thank you so very much. Happy to see that the rest of you didn't stop smiling. So, Rusty.
I just want to share it's not the aspects of the culture, but it's a tool that I've seen company use, which is they spent a decent amount of time coming up with their values. And it wasn't just a word, it was a word, but then a very short sentence that described what it looks like to live that value. And at the start of every meeting, they read the values. So any meeting that had more than 3 people, you read the values. Probably took a minute, but it was their way of saying this matters to us and keeping it front and center in front of everybody.
Thank you so very much. And just a little bit over 1 minute we have left, but we can make the most of it. Nicole.
Yeah, I won't give a specific example or anecdote, but what I will say is the example that Rusty gave, that Shanna gave, any of these things, once you're to the point where you feel like you have a culture that is on its way to where you want it to be, is around marketing it. You know, I mean, to me, it's like marketing and communication is key to getting your employee value prop and your employee experience and candidate experience out. And so whether that is internal communications to your existing staff, to how change management happens and those rollouts occur, to externally on job boards or your social media platforms or whatever it is, right? There's a role for how this gets marketed and communicated, which is then translated into a competitive competitive advantage as you're trying to attract. And that also then starts to translate into retention as well, because people feel it, right? It's sort of that hearts and minds that then they want to be a part of it. And so lots of work to get there, right? But once you're there, you know, it's starting to talk about all these things that you have in place and marketing them pretty strongly.
Thank you so much. Denise.
Culture is a competitive differentiator when you see people seeking you out to learn about your culture and to learn more from you and those around you about how you've created the value that you're presenting to your shareholders. Culture is ever changing and ever shifting underneath of the above the foundations of values that are aligned to the organization purpose, and it affects and infects the culture of the way the employees experience it and your client's experience. When the client experience and the employee experience are the same, your culture is running fast.
Thank you so much. And Anu, please bring us home today.
Absolutely. What stands out to me and what my team does is we embrace the value of we are the they. And so it's about us. It's not about, we're not waiting for someone else. We're not saying they as far as the other part of the organization. So what is it that we need? What is it that we want? How do we actually drive it? So we don't ask, can I? We ask, how can we? And we embrace that value. And that's how we create our team culture. And that actually ripples out to the organization as well.
This has been absolutely fabulous. Denise, Nicole, Shayna, Anu, and Rusty, thank you so very much. Thank you, everybody listening in now or watching the recording. We hope that you will enjoy it at least just as much as we have. It was wonderful. Please keep an eye on Hacking HR, either on LinkedIn or on our platform. We've been cooking quite some good stuff coming up over the next months. Enrique and all my colleagues and myself, we are just so happy and grateful whenever we get to spend some time with you panelists and with you audience. Thank you so very much.
I just want to share one thing, because one element of culture that I think is important is celebrating accomplishments. And Manola has a brand new book, which is being published tomorrow. So on Friday, the 8th of September, for those of you, oh, look at that. Denise has a copy and Manola is holding up a copy. Everyday Inspiration for Change. We're happy for you. We're proud of you. Well done, Manola. So I just wanted to celebrate you here.
Thank you. Thank you. I usually am nervous and cry before a panel, but now I am nervous and will cry after the panel. Thank you. You are wonderful, and none of this would have been possible without you and all the wonderful people in Hacking HR. Thank you. And thank you so much, Jessa.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.